Alright, we're going to do chapter 3.7 in two sections. Today is going to be absolute value equations, and then the next day is going to be absolute value inequalities, which is two separate things. Again, we're going to look at another modification of solving. Again, everything kind of revolves around the solving that we've been working on. Hopefully you've been up to speed on that. It's not extremely tough to do once you master the main idea of absolute values, but let's just take a moment to discuss what they are in general. So the absolute value of a number is the overall amount of the number with no sign. So this bar is a absolute value bar. What it means is that the absolute value of 5 would be 5 because it would be 5 with no sign. The absolute value of negative 10 would be 10 because it's a 10 with no positive or negative sign. The absolute value of 20 is 20 because again it's just a 20 with no sign on it, just like the absolute value of negative 105 comes out as 105. So again, the absolute value just pretty much means take whatever's in there and rewrite the number without any signs on it, and that is what we get there. Okay? Once we understand that concept, we have a good chance of grasping the main idea of solving absolute value equations, and that is where we get into our work. So the essential question today is, why is this any different from solving general equations? Well, if you consider the fact that absolute value bars convert the value into a number with no sign, that actually leaves us two answers to the following equation, because you can plug a 6, as you can read down here, you can plug a 6 in for x, and the absolute value of 6 is 6. You could also plug a negative 6 into that x, and you would get the answer of 6 also, which means that if you can have two of those, if we don't find both answers, then we actually haven't solved the equation at all. So the difference with absolute value is that you must understand again that there will now be two answers to every question, unless it's 0, because absolute value of 0 is the only number that has just one answer, but any other number has two answers to it, so you need to be careful. Translating an absolute value equation takes two steps. First thing you want to do is rewrite the problem without the bars. The second thing you want to do is rewrite without the bars and switch the number, which we'll talk about what that means. That's kind of a generic explanation, but again, it's just for notes, which means hopefully after you've done this, you kind of add to this and make whatever augmentations you need to make it understandable to you. But again, the main thing you do first is rewrite it without the bars, and then you rewrite without bars and switch the outside number if you want to put that there. But again, that's the main thing. Looking at some examples of that, if I was given the problem that said, and it wanted me to translate, because you're going to see this on your Math Excel, if you wanted to translate the following problem, the first thing you would do is again rewrite it without the bars, which is x equals 7. Then you would use the word and then you rewrite without the bars and you switch the outside number. So that would be your two answers, x equals 7 and x equals negative 7. That would be it. I'm not quite sure right now whether it's and or, so please check with me if you really want to be specific. I can look it up, but I did not look that up before I started this, but be careful. I'm pretty sure it's and because it is both of those answers at work. So like I said, if you really want to know the specifics, ask and I'll be glad to look it up, but I kind of got caught off guard with that, whether it was and or. Anyway, on this, again, the first thing you would do if it was absolute value of x plus 1 equals 10 is you would rewrite without the bars. So without the bars, it would say x plus 1 equals 10. And then you would put some space and put and then the other one would be without the bars, which is x plus 1, and then you switch the outside number, which would be negative 10. Now of course we know over here that you would subtract 1 from both sides and get our answer. Here we would subtract 1 from both sides, and again you would get two separate answers. I'll work this out, you don't have to, just to show you. The first answer is 9, the second answer is negative 11, and just to check it out to make sure I'm not lying to you, if you put a 9 in there, 9 plus 1 is 10, and the absolute value of 10 is 10. Here, if you put a negative 11 in there, negative 11 plus 1 is negative 10, and the absolute value of negative 10 is still 10. So again, that is what you are looking at. You don't need to write all this, but again, this is what you need to make sure you understand about translating it. That's all you have to do when you translate it on your work until you get to the ones where they want the solution. Again, on the third one, first thing we do is write without bars, so 2x plus 3 equals 11, and 2x plus 3, right without the bars, equals negative 11. And again, those two equations is what you would use to find your two answers. We are not going to focus on solving because again, I try to be as efficient as I can, and doing too much solving is going to take extra time. We should already have that skill mostly under control, and if you don't, again, it's up to you to kind of come up and make sure you speak up to me and let me know so I can kind of get you back on track in terms of your solving, but setting it up should be all you need to worry about so that we can then just focus on the solving later. Sometimes other numbers surround the absolute value. When this happens, we just have to isolate the absolute value. Now listen carefully to what I'm telling you. When you are translating the absolute value, I like to think about it like this. When you do this translation from here to here, I like to think about it like a Superman or a Batman or whatever it might be. Let's just think Superman. And one thing we know is that Superman does not change whenever somebody's in the building or in the room with him, because then they would know who he is. He always goes into like a phone booth or somewhere away from everybody. And so when you see absolute values, before you change them, you must make sure there's nobody else on the side with him or with it. So what you want to do is, in order to isolate the absolute value, this is my absolute value portion that I'm going to change, but notice that there is a positive 3 with it. So what we will do is use algebra and simply subtract 3. And you'll bring down your absolute value of x plus 2, and then you'll bring down 7. Now you notice you have your absolute value of x plus 2 equals 7. What you would do from there is set your x plus 2 equals 7, x plus 2 equals negative 7, and solve from there. But again, this section here is just focusing on the isolating, that whenever you have an absolute value with numbers, move the numbers away from it. Here, if you had 3 times the absolute value of x minus 2, again, this is your absolute value portion. The 3 is in its way. Notice it's directly attached, which means it's being multiplied. So what you would do is divide both sides by 3. These two 3's, of course, cancel. You bring down your absolute value of x plus 2 equals 8. And again, from there, you would now change that to x minus 2 equals 8 and x minus 2 equals negative 8 and finish that question off. Alright. And then the last one of your examples in terms of what you're doing here. 5 times the absolute value of 2x plus 3 minus 6 equals 54. This is more of the level you'll see on the test, so make sure you're ready for that. The first thing you'll do in algebra, again, is move the number that's the weakest. Don't move the 5 because it's attached. Just like if I had 5x minus 6 equals 54, the 6 would be first to go. Same thing here. So move the 6 first by adding it. You bring down your 5, your absolute value of 2x plus 3, and your 60. And then we got to get rid of the 5, so we divide both sides by 5. Again, don't lose the absolute value of 2x plus 3 in that. And that gives you 12. And again, from there, once we get there, we can do 2x plus 3 equals 12 and 2x plus 3 equals negative 12 and find our two answers. Final thought for you now is that the parts for you to focus on for this section is just 2 things. Again, everything I'm trying to do is in small pieces. I think if we do small pieces and you focus like you're supposed to, that you will be fine. You'll find that I never really try to stack on 6 or 7 things, but again, 2 things. The first 2 things we learned about was making sure we knew to switch the sign when x was negative and when x was on the wrong side. And then we went to compound inequalities and we went to the and and or stuff. The stuff today is, again, do you understand how to translate the absolute value, which means if I have the absolute value of x plus 6 equals 7, do you know how to turn that into x plus 6 equals 7 and x plus 6 equals negative 7? That would be your translation of that into an equation that can be solved. The second thing you got to make sure you understand, because again, this is on the test coming up, is do you know how to isolate the absolute value? So when you have something like 2 times absolute value of x plus 1 minus 4 equals 10, do you know how to move the 4 and divide by 2, the stuff we just did in our examples? And then in the end, again, as long as you know how to do that, from there we would put x plus 1 equals 7 and x plus 1 equals negative 7, and then you would solve both of those, and that would be your 2 answers. Again, as an extra idea, just to show you, if I took this 6 and plugged it in here, check this out, take the 6 and plug it in here, 6 plus 1 is 7. Absolute value of 7 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 minus 4 is 10. Same thing here with negative 8. Put a negative 8 here, you have negative 8 plus 1 is negative 7. But the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 minus 4 still gives me 10. So again, this is the isolation part. This is the translation part. So as long as you've got both of those at least understood, I think today should be an easy day for you. Just be careful. Again, I have the Math XL set up, so you have to do it. If you have issues, please bring your computers up. Again, you are becoming more and more independent. I need you to become more and more independent, not because I don't want to help you, but because the more independent you become, the faster you become independent in here, the more I can help you, because you're not going to make it through math if you hold on to the rail and you always have to, be everything directly explained to you. You want to get assistance. You want to become more independent. You want to make sure you're working at your pace and that you find your system, because once you find your system in math class gets a lot easier. It's not like it'll be a simple job for you, but you'll have at least a system that works for you. So again, make sure you practice your solving. Make sure you know when to bring up your computer. Don't stare at one question for 50 minutes and then think that it's just going to hit you. Also, as I explained, please don't guess your way through the answers, because you cannot guess your way through the answers on a test. You can't just type in a 6 on the test and then say, oh, I got it wrong, let me try something else. You've got to become more efficient. So if you try an answer and it does not work, and you try it twice, I would say come to me, because I sit up at the desk waiting for you to ask for help on the third time before you miss it like that, because I usually have more than one, and getting help the first time means you can apply it a couple times and get used to it. But other than that, like I said, you still got that test next week. Tomorrow you're going to have a lab in this class, and then, as I said, next week we'll get one lesson and then a lot of days to review before we take that test. And again, if you are someone who is on the brink of failing this quarter or on the brink of having a grade lower than what you want, now is the time to kick in. Make sure you get everything. The homework has all of your test questions in it in practice, so take advantage of it, please. Other than that, good luck.